Hello, everyone, and a very warm welcome to this webinar. So I am Rahma Balezi, Product Manager for Ruminants, and we are very happy to have you with us today from all around the world. So our topic is ruminal acidosis, a condition that remains one of the major threats to dairy cow health and productivity. So when rumen pH drops, it doesn't only affect digestion, it reduces feed efficiency, challenges animal welfare, and ultimately impacts profitability. And this is where magnesium becomes a true ally. So beyond its well-known role in over 300 physiological functions, magnesium plays a central part in supporting rumen stability, improving buffering capacity, and helping cows better cope with acidosis risk. So at CMAB, we work with it every day, and we are still learning how powerful this element really is. So we are honored today to welcome Professor Alex BACH, a leading dairy researcher from Spain and professor at the Catalan Institute for Research and Advanced Studies, and he will share with us the latest insights on ruminal acidosis and explain how magnesium can be used as a practical tool to protect rumen health and sustain their dairy performance. So throughout the webinar, please use the chat. So share your thoughts, your experiences, and your questions, and we will answer as many as possible during the session. And any question we don't answer today will be shared later in a Q&A document sent to all participants. So with that, let's get started. Alex, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the introduction and for the invitation. Today, yes, we're going to talk about ruminal acidosis. It's a very common, as Rama was saying, disease or pathology in dairy cattle. And we'll also cover why magnesium might be our ally to try to control this incidence of ruminal acidosis. How common it is? It's quite common. Okay, so if we look for it, we're going to find it. All the studies, they show that easily about 20% of the cows in early lactation experiment some periods of ruminal acidosis, and even about 25% of the cows in mid-lactation, they also have ruminal acidosis. When you look at more novel studies and in different regions, the previous slide was from the US, but when you look at the Netherlands or Iran or Italy, Ireland, again, US, United Kingdom or Germany, the range is always pretty much the same. So it's you see ruminal acidosis ranging between 15 and 25%, which also makes you wonder when you see such a huge number of incidents, whether it's not something that it's almost normal, right? So in different conditions, in different rations, in different countries, and different seasons of the year, you always have these 20% of animals that have ruminal acidosis, right? So, and we've been talking about it for a long time. So is it something that we cannot control? Is it something that we cannot prevent? Is it something that we have to live with? Or there are ways that we can actually minimize that. If you see the study from Ireland, it's 11% only, so that's a little one. But then you see other studies from Iran or other regions like US where you have 26 or 28. So there are differences there. And the question is, can we really, how low do we need to go? And what can we do to avoid such a high incidence? So just very briefly, to understand what's really causing this ruminal acidosis, we need to understand what's the origin so we can make some actions to prevent it. So then we'll see, how can I know if I have this problem? Do I have to measure rumen pH in the cows, which I'm not going to do it under practical conditions? So what can I know if I have a problem or not? And then what tools do I have to avoid or prevent or control this ruminal acidosis? So very briefly, the causes. If we look in the literature, we can draw associations, which that doesn't mean a cause, okay? So we can draw an association between the amount of fiber I have in the diet and the rumen pH. And you can see in this graph that the more fiber I have in my diet, the greater the rumen pH. I could draw another graph, which would be also an association, what is the opposite of fiber, which would be the non-fiber carbohydrate. And in that graph on the right, you see that the more non-fiber carbohydrate, so starch basically, the lower the rumen pH. So these are associations, like I said. But if you were to think about what's causing rumen acidosis, fiber has little to do with it. Okay, the real cause of rumen acidosis is the accumulation of acid in the rumen, and that acid is being produced by mainly non-fiber carbohydrates, because the rate of production of that acid is much faster in non-fiber carbohydrates than in fiber. So as we increase the amount of non-fiber carbohydrates, there is an accumulation of acid in the rumen, and that may lead to rumen acidosis. Of course, when we increase non-fiber carbohydrates, what does go down in the diet? It has to go down NDF, right? So we increase the starch, NDF goes down. So now we have an association between high fiber in the diet and high rumen pH. But really, the root of the problem is not low or high fiber. It's low or high starch. So, and specifically, it's high starch or high non-fiber carbohydrates. Then there is the dichotomy that when we formulate rations, we tend to formulate rations using percentages, right? We sit in the computer and we say, oh, I want a ration with 15% crude protein or 18 or 27% NDF, maximum 28% starch, whatever. And that's a little mistake, okay? Because what I said is what's really causing rumen acidosis is not the proportion or percentage of starch in the rumen, is the amount, okay? A percentage doesn't give you a yield of acid, it's just an amount, it's grams of something that gets fermented, it's gonna yield some moles of acid, okay? Or some grams, if you wish, of acid. So in these two graphs, what I'm showing you, and you can just look at one of them, it doesn't really matter, you see that there are circles or squares. And what I'm showing you here is data from dairy cattle and beef cattle. And dairy cattle, they consume rations that are maybe 28, 30% starch. And beef cattle, they consume rations that are 60%, 55% starch. So on paper, if I were to ask you, okay, what do you think is going to have more rumen acidosis? A beef animal that consumes 55% starch, or a dairy cow that consumes 28 or 30% starch? We might be inclined to think that, oh, the ration that has a greater proportion of starch is more dangerous. Well, you can see it here well, and the units are important. It's NFC kilos per day. The squares, which are at the left side upper corner, so with a higher rumen pH, squares are beef animals, okay? These animals that consume a diet that's a lot of starch, they manage to have a higher rumen pH than dairy cattle that consume a ration with only 28% or 29 or 30 if you wish, but they have a lower rumen pH. Why? Well, because we need to multiply that percentage by the amount of kilos they consume. And a beef animal will eat maybe 8 kilos of dry matter. So 60% of that in form of starch, we're talking about 3-4 kilos of starch. That's not sufficient in a rumen that has a volume of 200 liters. It's not sufficient to reduce rumen pH to a point that is going to be dangerous to the animal. However, a dairy cow that starts eating 22, but she might actually eat 30 kilos of dry matter, even if her diet is low in starch, only 30%, you very rapidly go to 9, 10, or 11 kilos of starch. And that, of course, that's going to cause a lot of acid in the rumen, and that's where you may end up with a rumen acidosis, okay? So, in brief, the main cause of rumen acidosis is kilos of starch and non-fiber carbohydrates fed to a cow. Okay, it has nothing to do with anything else. It's just kilos of starch. That's what's causing rumen acidosis. So how can I know if I have a problem? Well, as any other animal, as a matter of fact, when things are not going right, the first thing that the animal will do is stop eating. So we start with a dairy cow and we offer her a ration. She's going to eat into the feed bank. What's going to happen is that ration is going to be really high in carbohydrates. There will be a lot of carbohydrates in the rumen being fermented. Rumen pH will go down. That will kill some bacteria in the rumen. The bacteria that die, they will expose their contents into the rumen liquid, and the osmolality of the rumen will increase. It will have more soluble particles in it. There are sensors in the dorsal sac of the rumen that sense the osmolality. And whenever osmolality goes up, above 320, 350 milliosmoles, the cow will stop eating. It's not because of pH is low, it's because osmolality is high. So, of course, after the cow stops eating, rumen pH will start to go up and osmolality will go down. So then the cow will feel hungry again. She will eat again. And of course, every time she eats, then she's going to get another decrease in rumen pH and osmolality going up. So you're going to see animals that are on and off feed. It's very relatively easy to see in animals under experimental conditions where they are on individual feeding and we know exactly how much the animal eats every day. But in practical situations, this is very difficult, right? Because when one cow is on the low end of eating, so she's having like a period of or episode of ruminal acidosis, her neighbor might be on the peak of intake. So when you look at the average intake, it might actually not change. So it's a bit more difficult. So in the field, I actually like to look more at the feces. So when you go to a pen and you see feces that are normal and then feces that are too wet or too dry, that's an indication that something is not right in that pen. Feces should be homogeneous in all the cows. When you have animals that poo very loose and animals that poo very dry on the same pen, that's a clear indication of ruminal acidosis. Other indications that you may have and people use, and I just want to warn you about those, is rumination time. I'm showing you here two studies, both are from Canada, where they look at associations again. And the first one on the left, it says that rumination time, so that's the amount of minutes that the cow ruminates per day, which nowadays we have sensors that will measure that, it's negatively correlated with mean rumen pH. So I will repeat, the more the animal ruminates, the lower the rumen pH. That's what that study found. Another study from Canada on the right corner, it shows the number of hours that rumen pH is below 5.8. So again, the greater number of hours with a pH below 5.8, you would consider that ruminal acidosis. And on the y-axis, we have rumination time. And what you see is that animals that ruminate close to 500 minutes per day are animals that have rumen pH below 5.8 for more than 20 hours a day. So they are in a very long episode of ruminal acidosis. Whereas animals that ruminate little, 300 minutes, they are only 10 hours a day with a rumen pH below 5.8. So again, the more the animals ruminate, the more the ruminal acidosis they have. Okay, which is opposite to our preconceived idea of ruminal acidosis. We always think that when an animal has ruminal acidosis, that's because they don't chew, and then there is no saliva, and then they have ruminal acidosis. Well, so what's going on here, right? So one could say, no, these two studies are from Canada. Canadians, they don't know what they're doing, so that's wrong. I don't think that's the case, right? So the other option is we have to think about it. So why would animals that ruminate a lot have lower ruminal acidosis? Well, rumination is not only elicited by the amount of fiber that the animal eats. Rumination is elicited by the amount of kilos that the animal consumes. So what are the cows that are at a greater danger of having ruminal acidosis? The cows that eat the most. And the cows that eat the most are the cows that ruminate the most, okay? So animals that eat 17 kilos a day, they will rarely have ruminal acidosis. And of course, because they eat very little, they will ruminate less time than a cow that is eating 30 kilos of feed, okay? So if you're using sensors for rumination, be careful, because animals that ruminate more may not be the healthiest, okay? And I'm just showing you this in one study where you see eating time and rumination time, and you look at rumination time on the right, and the different colors indicate the different amounts of forage in the diet. So you go from a 40% forage diet, which maybe could cause some acidosis because that means that it has a lot of starch and a lot of non-fiber carbohydrates, to a ration that has 70% forage. And you look at rumination time, and they're pretty much the same. It's only 20-minute difference between 40% and 70% forage. If you want to use rumination time for assessing acidosis, you have to look at intake. Once you express rumination time per kilo of feed consumed, then you'll see the relationship that you were expecting. Then it is true that the cows that have episodes of ruminal acidosis, they ruminate less per kilo of feed consumed, okay? Not on a daily basis, not in minutes per day, but it's in minutes per kilo of feed consumed. Okay, so that's important. So this practice that people do, I'm gonna look at the pens. Oh yeah, the cows are ruminating. Yeah, so what? Tell me how much they eat, and then I can calculate. Okay, this rumination time over what they eat makes sense or doesn't make sense. Okay, so that's what you should be looking at. So we've covered the causes, we've covered the symptoms. What can we do to prevent it? If we identify that we have a problem with ruminal acidosis, what can we do to either minimize it or not having it at all? And one of the first things that comes in mind is fiber. Okay, but I already said at the beginning that fiber doesn't have a lot to do with the root of the cause, or the root of the problem. The real cause is non-fiber carbohydrates. When we play with fiber, it's a subproduct. It's a byproduct of a change in the amount of starch that we're feeding in the diet. But of course, you could say, well, but also particle size matters, right? So it's not only chemistry, it's also physics. We need to make sure that the fiber that we provide is long enough, because that's going to stimulate chewing and that's going to generate some saliva. And that is correct, okay? So then people have come up with ideas of defining the particle size of the fiber. And we have what we call effective fiber, EMDF. This is a system proposed by Dave Mertens from USDA. And you can see that there is a nice association between the percentage of physically effective fiber, which is particles that have a given size, and I'll tell you what the size is, containing fiber, and both milk fat percentage and rumen pH. So the more physically effective fiber we have in the diet, the greater rumen pH. When you look at the paper by Mertens in 1997, the definition of physically effective fiber is any particle that has fiber. So corn has fiber, only 8%, but it has fiber. Straw has 70% fiber. Okay, so it's more, but corn would also classify as a physically effective fiber, provided that it has a minimum particle size. And the minimum particle size to be considered physically effective is 1.18, and here come the units, millimeters. So we're talking about something very, very small. And I'll repeat, is 1.18 millimeters. That's the definition of physically effective fiber. Okay, that's how these models were constructed, and that's what Cornell model and other models consider physically effective fiber. Yeah? So it's not 2 centimeters, not 3 centimeters, it's 1.18 millimeters. Very small. Of course, there have been many studies using this physically effective fiber concept, and people have come up with some other ideas. And instead of looking at 1.18, why don't we use the physically effective fiber defined with the particles, with the pen stage separator, which then they gives you a range, and they look at particles that are 8 millimeters or even 19 millimeters, so much bigger. But again, when you look in the literature and you look at the relationship between physically effective fiber in the diet and rumen pH, there is not a lot of correlation, okay? To the point that just recently, some researchers evaluated the concept, and they propose not only to look at fiber in the diet, but also to look at a combination. So it's physically effective fiber plus the chemistry fraction of the ration. And that didn't work too well either. So at the end, the new model, the NASEM 2021, came up with, which is the physically adjusted NDF, which is a system that, like I said, integrates physically particle size and also chemistry and also type of the animal that you're eating, that you're feeding the ration. But it makes a note, NASEM, saying, yeah, this is not intended to use it as a minimum requirement for the diet. It's just a system to assess whether the rumen will be healthier or not. Okay, so it's more diffuse, it's not very concrete. Okay, and that's what the literature says. It's very difficult to control rumen pH by modifying particle size of the fiber. Many factors participate there, right? If you offer a ration that's too long, with fiber that's too long, that fiber will never be effective because it will not be eaten by the animal. Okay, so you have that constraint. On the other side, if you go very fine, the animal might eat it and then it might chew, so it might work. So there is a lot of confounding factors when you play with particle size, and that's why there's a lot of noise in the literature, and it makes it difficult to come up with a system that is consistent and effective in avoiding rumen acidosis. That's another way of looking at particle size of the diet. This is actually something that we developed in our laboratory, which is we use AI to take a picture of the ration, and then we, instead of doing a pen stage separator, we actually identify not all the particles, but most of the particles in the ration, and we come up with a histogram. So it gives us a full description of all the particles that are identified by the camera, and gives you both the perimeter and the length. But again, when you relate this with rumen acidosis or milk production or butter fat, there is a substantial noise. There are good indications of whether the ration is way too long or way too short, but it's a gray area. I cannot say, yeah, you have to have 2.1 or 2.6. It depends on the diet, it depends on the animal, it depends on how much the animals consume, many other factors. Then think about a little bit the physiology of that. So why would fiber be important, right? So let's make just a very simple equation to predict rumen pH in the rumen. And we can use just the typical equation, which that says that rumen pH depends on the concentration of carbonates and CO2. And it's an equilibrium between the CO2 and carbonate in the rumen. And that equilibrium will be slanted or modified by the production of acid and also by the arrival of saliva. Saliva has about 80 millimolars of sodium bicarbonate. So that's, of course, going to provide carbonate for increasing rumen pH. Then the question is, how much saliva can a cow produce? And on average, they produce 240 liters of saliva. So taking into account the concentration of sodium bicarbonate in saliva, that means that an animal can produce about 19 moles of sodium bicarbonate on a daily basis, which is about 0.8 moles per hour. Okay, if we assume that these 240 liters of saliva are constant throughout 24 hours. The addition of 19 moles of sodium bicarbonate to the rumen would mean an increase of rumen pH from 5.8 to 6.07. Okay, so that's how much power we have in saliva. Okay, saliva will increase rumen pH about 0.3, 0.4 units of pH. Now the question is, a cow will never ruminate, secrete zero saliva. So you can have a cow that's eating whatever, 20 kilos of feed. She's going to produce already 150, 180, maybe 200 liters. Now, depending on the fiber particle size and the type of fiber and other factors, you may be able to increase a little bit more saliva. Okay, but what I'm saying is that increase of saliva, maybe from 200 to 240, those 40 liters of saliva additional, is not going to increase rumen pH by a lot. Okay, so it maybe it's going to increase it from 5.8 to 5.9 or 5.95. Okay, so saliva is important, but the marginal increase that we're going to get with an addition of more fiber or stimulating the rumination of the animal is not going to be that big in terms of more liters of saliva and more sodium bicarbonate being supplied to the rumen. So what can we do then? Things that we need to explore. Okay, so now in terms of prevention, I would prevent feeding rations that are very rich in water. Rations that are more than 60% moisture, they're a bit dangerous in terms of rumen acidosis. Also, cows that eat and then they consume lots of water, that's a danger or a predisposition for rumen acidosis. The reason being is that if we add, pH is the dilution of acid in a solution, right? So the more acid I have in a solution, the lower the pH. So one could think, well, if my solution that has, 1 mole of acid, now I add more liquid, the pH will go up because I'm diluting the amount of acid per liter or per milliliter. That works, and that's true under aerobic conditions. Under anaerobic conditions, we have an equilibrium of CO2 in the liquid form and in the gas form. So when the animal drinks water, what's going to happen is that part of the CO2 that's in the air is going to have to go into the liquid to reach the equilibrium. And after we've seen the equation in the former slide, and this one where the CO2 pressure has a big influence on rumen pH, now we have a movement of CO2 into the liquid fraction. That's going to create some acid. That's going to reduce rumen pH. Okay, so it's opposite to what happens in the absence of oxygen. So when you have rations that are very wet, typical of animals on pasture, you look at animals in pasture saying, well, these animals are eating forage basically. You look at the feces of these animals and they're very loose all the time because they don't digest it well because the rumens are not working very well because they have ruminal acidosis. Many times that's because with the forage, which is about 80% moisture, they get a lot of water. So the rumen gets a lot of acid all the time, okay? So that's something to consider. So that would be one way of preventing ruminal acidosis, is monitoring the moisture content of the rations and the amount of water that the animals eat right after they consume lots of rations. Other things that you could use is additives. And the first one that comes in mind is yeast. And yeast have been attributed the ability of increasing dry matter intake under ruminal acidosis conditions because they potentially improve fiber digestion, and on the long term, they can improve animal performance. Those are the arguments. When you look in the literature, there is a lot of conflicting studies. Okay? There is all over the place. There are responses, there are no responses. There is a lot of noise. Okay? Part of the reason is because not all the yeasts are the same, and some do one thing, some do another thing. So here is just a study that we did a long time ago, where we compare different strains of yeast and their ability to foster fiber digestibility. And you can see that some of them, they work very well, and some of them, they do the same almost as nothing. Okay, so you have to know what yeast you're using and why you're using it and what you expect out of it. The other issue that you have to think about yeast is when you look at the mode of action, it's well described in vitro with doses that are very, very high. Okay, so yeast are thought to control rumen pH because they will scavenge oxygen and they will improve rumen environment. But that's been proven when they feed 1.3 milligrams of yeast per milliliter. Okay, that means that in the rumen, we should be feeding 325 grams of yeast per day. That's not going to happen. Okay. The ability of Saccharomyces cerevisiae, a yeast, to compete with Streptococcus bovis, which is one of the main causes of ruminal acidosis, again, has been proven in vitro with a dose that is much greater. It's 10 to the 7th versus 10 to the 4th that we use commercially. Okay, so it's much bigger. And the same thing with other not yeast, but bacteria, like lactic acid utilizing bacteria, like Megasphaeras denai or Pseudomonas ruminantium. Again, the studies have been conducted with very high doses in vitro. So when we transport that into in vivo conditions, we might not get the same results. Other things we can have in our plate to control ruminal acidosis is buffers and alkalinizers. They're not the same. Okay, a buffer like sodium bicarbonate or sodium sesquicarbonate are particles or compounds that they offer resistance to a solution. They offer momentum to change. Okay, so they will, if you add sodium bicarbonate to a solution, pH might not change immediately, but then if you add acid, the acid will change the pH of that solution more slowly than if sodium bicarbonate wasn't there. So it's like a buffer. It's like a muffler. It will tune down responses. Alkalinizers are compounds that immediately change the pH of a solution and will increase it right away. Okay, they don't often resistance, they just increase the pH, and that would be an example of magnesium oxide. When we look at the literature, most of the studies with sodium bicarbonate were conducted in the 80s, and they were using doses of 1% dry matter. Okay, so when you're feeding about 125 or 250 grams of sodium bicarbonate per day, the literature shows that there is an improvement in intake, improvement in milk production. But even the initial studies, they were already mixing sodium bicarbonate with other compounds like magnesium oxide. And I find interesting this study from Ehrman et al. In 1982, where they compare control. They compare 1% sodium bicarbonate, 0.8% magnesium oxide, and then 1% sodium bicarbonate plus 0.8% magnesium oxide. And the cows that produce the most milk are the ones with circles, which is the one that's only fed 0.8% magnesium oxide. Okay, that was one of the first studies that were looking at these buffers and alkalinizers. I've never understood why then people made a lot of emphasis in sodium bicarbonate when this pioneer study already showed that magnesium alone was actually working better than the combination of bicarbonate and magnesium and bicarbonate alone. Okay, and there are reasons for that, and I will talk about this a bit later. Then if you put all the literature together about sodium bicarbonate, and that's what Hugh and Murphy did in 2005. They did a meta-analysis where they put a whole bunch of studies together and they look at the response in rumen pH when you add two different doses of sodium bicarbonate, 0.9%, which they call it moderate, or high, which 1.4%. Okay, 0.9% for many of you would be moderate, will not be moderate, would be high. Okay, my experience is that people in the field, they very rarely feed 1% sodium bicarbonate. They usually feed 80 grams, 100 grams, which is around 0.4, 0.5%. Okay. Nevertheless, in the literature and in the studies that show an effect, 0.9 would be moderate, 1.4 would be high. What these studies show is that when your ration has no corn silage, there is no response in rumen pH when you add sodium bicarbonate, not at the moderate level, not at the high. Only when your ration has corn silage, then you can expect an increase in rumen pH of 0.13. Okay, so here it shows as negative because I'm comparing control versus sodium bicarbonate, and control is lower. So how much lower is 0.1 lower? Okay, so that means that if you have a rumen pH of 5.9 and you add sodium bicarbonate, 1% of the dry matter, you will go to a pH of 6.0. Okay, if your diet has corn silage. If it doesn't have corn silage, your pH will not change. That's what the literature says. Now, from my point of view, this is an important consideration that we sometimes don't do when we decide to use a feed additive. If I decide to use sodium bicarbonate because I want to control rumen pH in my cows, and I have to use 1% because that's what the literature says. Below that, there is no effect. Okay, so if my cows are eating 27 kilos of dry matter, that means I have to use 270 grams out of those 27 kilos to provide sodium bicarbonate. That's going to cost me 10 cents per cow and day. That's the cost of sodium bicarbonate. 270 grams of sodium bicarbonate will cost more or less 10 cents. But the real cost of supplementing 270 grams of sodium bicarbonate to these cows is not 10 cents. Because now, those 27 kilos that I had, I no longer have them. I only have 26.7 to provide the same amount of protein, energy, vitamins, etc. that I have to provide to the cows. I have less space. That means that now I have to use ingredients that are more nutrient dense. They have more energy, more proteins. I have to use expensive fats. I have to use expensive proteins. My diet goes up. So there is the indirect cost of feeding sodium bicarbonate because of the space it takes in the ration. And the indirect cost, it's actually higher than the direct cost. The indirect cost is 15 cents. So that means that if I add 270 grams to a ration, my ration will go from 10.37 euros a day to 10.62 euros a day. It went up 25 cents per cow and day, even though the cost of sodium bicarbonate was only 10 cents. Okay, so we need to account for that as well. And that's an important concept. So what other alternative we have? And that's why we're talking about an ally. The ally would be sodium magnesium oxide. Magnesium oxide is 3 times more powerful than sodium bicarbonate in controlling rumen pH. That means that I can use 3 times less. So I'm going to take less space in the diet. Okay, so my diet will be less expensive due to lower indirect costs. Oops, sorry, I don't know what happened here. I'm going to fix this. I don't know why it moved. Sorry. This is a nice study where it was done in vitro, and what they had is rumen fluid, and they had a control, that's the bottom graph, and they incubated this rumen fluid with sugar, and then they put nothing, or magnesium oxide, that's the middle graph, or sodium bicarbonate, the top graph. When there is control, so there is nothing added, the initial pH is around 7. Okay, you have to look at the axis on the right, and it will go down after 150 hours to a pH that's below 4. It's 3.8 or something. And then the black lines show the accumulation of VFAs and lactic acid, and the circles denote lactic acid. So you can see that after about 50 hours, there is an accumulation of lactic acid in the controlled diet, and it goes up all the way to 250 millimoles at 150 hours, and where the pH is 3.8. Now we go to the top graph with sodium bicarbonate, and we see pretty much the same as control. Okay, so we started again at 7, but pH goes down to 4, and it goes down to 4 very rapidly after about 25 hours or so. And of course, it's greater than 3.8 in control. So sodium bicarbonate is having an effect. But still, we have an accumulation of lactic acid, not as high as in control, but still there is lactic acid. Now we look at magnesium oxide. In this case, it's magnesium hydroxide, but it's I'll tell you the difference in a second. We start with a pH of 7, and then look at 150 hours later, the pH is 6. It's not 3.8, it's not 4, it's 6. Okay, and if you look at the circles, which would be lactic acid, you will not find them. Okay, they are hidden very close to 0. So there is no accumulation of lactic acid. Okay, so it's a very nice study that shows how much more powerful magnesium oxide is in contrast to sodium bicarbonate. Now, this study is not magnesium oxide, it's magnesium hydroxide. Okay, and that's important. Magnesium oxide per se does nothing in the rumen. Okay, it's not a base, it's just a mineral. Okay, but once it is in contact with water, it will dissolve, it will split, and then it will do a base. It will do magnesium hydroxide. But for that to happen, it has to be solubilized. Okay. Not all the products that we use in the market, and I'll show you, it's the same thing as yeast. Not all the same are the same, and not all the products are the same. So there are magnesium oxides in the market with very low solubility that will never have an impact on rumen pH because they will never dissolve. Okay, they will not convert into magnesium hydroxide. That's partition into magnesium hydroxide, and it's very important because we need free magnesium. Not only, so we have the base section, which is hydroxide, that will increase rumen pH, but then we have the magnesium part, which is also important for other functions in both in the rumen and in the animal. And one is, in the rumen, is a cofactor of rumen cellulases, in the same manner that iron is a cofactor for red blood cells to capture oxygen. Some cellulases in the rumen, they need magnesium to degrade fiber. So that's important that it's soluble and reachable by these bacteria. And then also magnesium is a cofactor in the mammary gland for fat synthesis. Okay? So if it doesn't get dissolved, if it doesn't dissociate into magnesium hydroxide, it will never be a source of magnesium either. Okay, so that's important. How much different they are? Well, this is just 4 different products in the market with magnesium oxide. One of them in blue is 10% soluble, so it's almost nothing, and one of them is 100%. So what product are you using? Well, it depends of what you buy. Okay, there are tests that you can do in the lab to see solubility, and basically availability and solubility are very, very correlated. They go very hand in hand. If they're not soluble, they're not going to be available. Okay, so that's the first one. Other products that we could use beyond magnesium oxide or sodium bicarbonate could be calcium carbonate, okay, or limestone or lithothamnium. These are all based on calcium carbonate. The problem with this option is that calcium carbonate, it doesn't matter whether it's calcareous from the wheat or from the sea or from stones. It's chemically, it's very low solubility. So it will only solubilize when pH of the solution where it is, it's below 3.5 or 4. And of course, that's too late for the ruminal acidosis, right? We're going to start being concerned about ruminal acidosis when pH is below 5.8 or 5.7. At that time, calcium carbonate is not very well solubilized. So it cannot dissociate to carbonate and increase rumen pH, okay? So it's not a very plausible option from my point of view. So now to finish, I just wanted to show you a couple of studies that we've done involving magnesium oxide and compared it to sodium bicarbonate. The first study was in 2017, and what we did was we induced ruminal acidosis to a group of cows. And the way we did it is we sequentially increased barley in the diet, and we sequentially removed forage. Okay, we had to make some space, so we put more starch and reduced fiber. And we had a baseline with a ration that was 60% forage. And that's the dry air intake that you can see on the first graph. And you have control, then SB means sodium bicarbonate, and magnesium is Mg. If you look at the black bars, this is when we had the highest episode of ruminal acidosis. Intake went down in the control and in the sodium bicarbonate. But in magnesium oxide, it didn't go down, okay? It stayed pretty much the same. We know why, right? We know that when there is rumen pH is low, there is high osmolality and the cow stops eating, okay? We also know that the less the fiber in the diet, the greater the intake. So you would expect that a ration with less forage and more concentrate would be consumed at a greater amount. But it's not happening in the control, it's not happening in the sodium bicarbonate, it's not happening in the magnesium oxide either, right? But it's still, it doesn't go down. But I was expecting a greater intake in any case. It didn't happen, right? If we look at rumen pH at the bottom, that would be the left bottom graph. You see that again, the black line, which is with the highest amount of concentrate. With control, we have a very low pH. With sodium bicarbonate, it's pretty much the same, very low. But with magnesium oxide, it's lower than the baseline, but it's much greater than with sodium bicarbonate or control, okay? Then we repeated the study, and we did the same protocol. We were a little bit more aggressive, and we also look at DCAT, because some people are concerned that if you're not using sodium bicarbonate in the diet, then sodium might be a bit lower in the diet, and DCAT might go down, and intake might go down, okay? So we actually did the same. So we went from a ration that was 47% forage to rations that were 36% forage, okay? From period 1 to period 4. And in every period, we had control, sodium bicarbonate, and magnesium oxide. And then the DCAT, without sodium bicarbonate, the lowest one was 32 or 28 with control of magnesium, and with bicarbonate, it was 37, okay? Or 370, 320, and 280. It depends on how you measure it. But the lowest was 280, okay? What we saw, the same thing as in the first study, okay? So as we increase the amount of concentrate and reduce forage, we were expecting an increase in intake. It didn't happen except for the gray bars, the magnesium, okay? There we can see that the cows respond as we expected. No, if you remove fiber in the diet, you would expect that the animals eat more. And that's what happened with magnesium oxide, okay? Especially when we are feeding lots of concentrate, okay? In the 4060 and the 3664. Control and sodium bicarbonate, they respond pretty much the same, okay? So it's always a bit better with sodium bicarbonate, but it's not a big difference, right? Even though we're feeding 270 grams of sodium bicarbonate. Rumen pH is the same. So as we increase concentrate in the diet, rumen pH goes down. But if you look at the gray bars, which is magnesium oxide, the decrease in rumen pH is much lower than in control, the blue bars, and the sodium bicarbonate, which is the green bars. And on the right side, you see the same thing. It's just the proportion of the day with rumen pH below 5.8, which again was much lower with magnesium oxide than with control or sodium bicarbonate. If we look at fiber digestibility, okay, so we didn't mention this, but this one of the concerns that we have with ruminal acidosis is not the ruminal acidosis per se, because the animal will stop eating and move on, right? It will correct itself. The problem is that it has a little bit long-term consequences. The animal stops eating because some bacteria died, osmolality went up. Now the animal will eat again, but these bacteria are gone. And the bacteria that are gone are basically fibrolytic. And it's going to take some time for these bacteria to come back. But fibrinogen bacteria are very sensitive to rumen pH. When it goes below 6.2, they start having trouble making contact with the fiber. And of course, if they cannot contact the fiber, they cannot attach to the fiber, they cannot digest it, and they eventually die. Okay, and especially after 5.8, they just cannot survive. So you can see it here that as we increase the amount of concentrate in the diet, the digestibility of NDF goes down, right? Which doesn't make sense because, in fact, it should be more digestible, right? Because there is less forage and the concentrate has NDF, and then NDF should be digested, but it goes down. It goes down because rumen pH goes down, right? But if you look at the magnesium bars, again, the gray ones, digestibility was greater than sodium bicarbonate and control when things were extreme. When we were in the high concentrate and low forage with very low pH, then sodium bicarbonate and control diets were not able to sustain a fibrolytic population. Okay, and we actually look at it, and I'll show you that. I can show you now. We look at the fibrolytic bacteria and the composition of rumen microbes in these conditions. And if you look at the amount of fibrobacteria, which would be the second column, you see that is an A in AMG. That means that cows on magnesium oxide in the third period, which is when they had the highest amount of concentrate and the lowest pH, they had about double the amount of fibrobacter than control and sodium bicarbonate. So you actually see that response in fibrobacterial bacteria when the rumen pH conditions are a bit better. Now, this graph is interesting. It's a bit complicated, but I think it really shows the dynamics of what happens with when you're feeding sodium bicarbonate or magnesium oxide. And I will explain it. On the x-axis, we have the hour of the day. It's from 0 to 24. Okay. Then you have the solid lines are at the bottom, starting at 5.5. That's the intake. That's how much the animal starts eating. So at midnight, they're starting 5 kilos. Then at at night, they have 5.6, and they keep going. Okay. At 7 a.m., they get fed. And you can see that the blue line, which is magnesium, they're starting eating more, right? And then the control and the sodium bicarbonate. And they continue to eat more throughout the day, right? Then, if you follow around 3 p.m., which is when we feed again, now the sodium bicarbonate cows, they actually eat, that's a gray bar, or the gray line, they eat more than the control, okay? They manage to eat more, and they eat almost the same as the blue ones, which is magnesium oxide. Now, when we look at rumen pH, we also have to look always at primary intake. That's why we combine this graph with the two lines. We start with the pH at midnight, it's about 5.8, okay? And it's lowest with sodium bicarbonate. Then sodium bicarbonate cows, right after feeding at 8 a.m., they have the highest rumen pH, followed by control, and then followed by magnesium oxide cows, which are the lowest, okay? But look at the intakes. It turns out that magnesium oxide are the cows that eat a bit more already. They have more substrate in the rumen, they have a greater production of acid, okay? Now, days goes on, and the cows start eating more, and look at what happens with sodium bicarbonate cows, the gray ones. They have actually a lower rumen pH than the control. Cows that have sodium bicarbonate, they have periods between 11 a.m. all the way to 23 p.m., okay, 11 at night. They have a lower pH than the control, than the black line. The reason being is that the cows with sodium bicarbonate were eating more, okay? There are many reasons why they eat more, but one of the reasons is the dilution effect of the diet. The diet with sodium bicarbonate has more minerals, okay? So the cows need to eat more to get the same amount of energy unless you increase the percentage of energy in the diet, okay? So these cows are striving, they're trying to achieve the energy needs. So they will eat more. And because they're eating more and sodium bicarbonate is not capable to counteract the acid that's being produced, rumen pH goes down, right? Now you see magnesium oxide, they're eating more and they have a greater rumen pH than control. Okay, so in summary, the cause of ruminal acidosis is an accumulation of acid in the rumen, okay? It's not a lack of fiber, it's not a lack of salivation, it's just, you tell me how many kilos of fermentable stuff I have in the rumen, and I will tell you the chances of ruminal acidosis. That's like burning wood in an oven. The more wood you put in, the greater risk of having ruminal acidosis. It's true that salivation may help ameliorating the ruminal acidosis, because saliva has buffers, it has phosphates, it has sodium bicarbonate, but the direct response to an additional forage that I add to a diet, it will be a marginal response. It will be very, very moderate. Okay, so it's not going to make a big change. So I have to refer to, again, the amount of non-fiber carbohydrate in my diet, or some additives. It could be yeast, it could be some probiotics based on bacteria, or it could be sodium bicarbonate, which is effective in diets with corn silage if you feed them at 1%, but then you have to consider the price. Remember the indirect cost of taking a space in the diet, because now you're taking 1% of the diet and just feeding rocks, if you wish, right, with no protein, no energy. The other alternative with magnesium oxide, which is 3 times more powerful than sodium bicarbonate. And if it's soluble, it will act rapidly in the rumen, will take little space in the diet, and will improve rumen pH quite effectively. I think that's all I had to share with you today. And if you have any questions, I'll like to entertain them. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Alex, for the very nice, complete presentation. I think we have 3 questions in the chat. So the first one, we have, at which ruminal pH does magnesium oxide begin to dissolve significantly, and how does this influence its availability as a buffer?
Yeah, that's a very, very good question. Let me see if I can find a slide very rapidly. It's very sensitive. The solubility of magnesium is very sensitive to pH, okay? It depends on the product that you're using. That's one thing. Let's see if I can find it. Just a second. Okay, I think I have it here. Yeah, let me share the screen for a second, and you'll see, because an image is worth more than 1,000 words. So I think as I show you this, you'll see it very rapidly. Can you see the screen?
Now, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, there's the solubility on the graph, and the digestive pH. So look at between 6 and 8, you're going to move from a solubility of 90% to less than 10%. It's very, very sensitive, okay? So, of course, the rumen pH will always be around 6.2 or something, so you will be moving between a solubility of 40 to 80%. So it's a big range. But, of course, that's with a very good product. If your product is poor, then you're going to have to go to a lower pH to get that product solubilized. And if you're talking about calcium carbonate, then it should be even a lower, much lower pH, like 4 or so. Okay. So yeah, it's very sensitive. But basically, you'll be moving around between 40 and 80%. That's the answer.
Thank you, Alex. We have another remark in the chat. So the question is that what should be the optimum moisture level of ration, and adding fresh fodder always considered better choice to avoid acidosis. But it's in contrast to what you said. So adding water in rumen decrease the pH.
Yeah. No, and that's exactly right. So my ideal dry matter content of the diets is between 48 and 55. That's my preferred range. If you go to lower than 48, you might start getting some problems with ruminal acidosis. You may also start having problems with rations that are very heavy, that everything gets packed because of the weight of the water, right? And people think that cows will not sort these type of diets. We did studies where they actually, they don't sort, but they don't eat. So intake goes down, okay? So, yeah, between 48 and 55 would be the ideal dry matter content of a diet. Regarding offering fresh forage to avoid ruminal acidosis, that's a dogma. But it's a myth. But there is no foundation behind it. I wouldn't do it.
Okay, thank you, Alex. We have another question. So, what impact could the substitution of sodium bicarbonate for MgO have on DCAT? Is there any impact on the intake?
No. The only impact on intake that you could have is if your diet was very low in sodium, then you may have a very low DCAT. But that's not typically the case. Typically, the lactating rations are always above 280, 300 milliequivalents per kilo on DCAT. So as long as you're above 280, 270, you're not going to have any change in intake.
Okay. Thank you. We have another question. We have a lot of questions. It's good. So in Middle East, sodium bicarbonate is being used at higher dosage. So replacing all sodium bicarbonate possible with magnesium oxide. If not, then how much? Or if yes, then what about sodium level?
Yeah. No, very good question. I mean, you need that sodium in the diet. Sodium it's important. So you have to watch your sodium levels. I don't know how much sodium bicarbonate they're feeding in this region, but if you're feeding 1%, or let's say the other one, if you're feeding less than 1% sodium bicarbonate, you can remove it from the diet without hesitation. Okay, you're gonna make space, and because all the literature says that when you're feeding less than 1% sodium bicarbonate, the impact is minimum in the rumen. Okay, so then how much magnesium oxide you should add to substitute sodium bicarbonate, depending on the product that you're using, depending on the solubility of magnesium oxide, but the ratio is 3 to 1. Okay, so magnesium oxide is 3 times more powerful than sodium bicarbonate in controlling pH. Now, if in the Middle East you're using, I don't know, 2% sodium bicarbonate, that would be too much magnesium oxide. I would not go more than 0.6% magnesium oxide. That would be already quite high.
Okay, here we have a more practical question. So what should I do to reduce subclinical acidosis in my farm? Rumen pH after 5 hours feeding is 4. I offer feed of 60-40 forage to concentrate ratio.
That's a tricky question. And if I like to be ironic sometimes, so I'm going to do it. If it's subclinical, don't worry about it. Subclinical means you cannot see it. It doesn't exist. I would only worry about something that I see. Okay, so if I see cows that stop eating, that my meat production is not there, that's where I will take action. Subclinical is a construct. I would not worry about it. Regarding the 60 to 40% concentrate, it depends on the concentrate, right? So I didn't mention that in the webinar, no, but it's not only the amount, it's also the type of non-fiber carbohydrates. So at the end, what causes ruminal acidosis is the accumulation of acid. That acid comes from non-fiber carbohydrates. That accumulation can be at different rates. So if you're feeding wheat or barley, they are more dangerous than if you're feeding corn. So that ratio of forage to concentrate ratio, it depends on what you're feeding. If you're feeding corn, you can go to a lower concentrate ratio. So forage to concentrate ratio, you can feed more corn. If you're feeding basically barley, then you have to be more careful.
Okay. Thank you, Alex. And we have another question regarding the effect of sodium bicarbonate, why it decreases when we add corn silage.
No. That sodium bicarbonate is only effective, according to the literature, when there is corn silage. If there is no corn silage, there is no effect. And the effect in corn silage is that it decreases, it increases pH by 0.1. So from 6.9 to 6 or 0.6 to 6.1. Why does it work in corn silage and it doesn't work when there is no corn silage? I don't know.
Okay. We have a final question. So, what is the difference between sodium bicarbonate and sodium carbonate in comparison with magnesium oxide as a buffer in their buffer ability?
Well, sodium carbonate, it's half the ability of sodium bicarbonate. It's like sodium sesquicarbonate. So it would be 6 times less than magnesium oxide. So magnesium oxide would be 1, sodium bicarbonate would be 3. That's the amount that you need. So if you put 1 gram of sodium of magnesium oxide, you will need 3 of sodium bicarbonate or 6 of sodium carbonate.
Okay. Thank you, Alex, for all this clarification. I think I will have enough time to have a quick reminder about the concept of pHix-up, and also I will show you some results regarding our meta-analysis. But first, a reminder regarding magnesium. So magnesium is a very important mineral for cattle, as it helps with bone strength. It supports the nucleation process, and especially for young animals. It also helps with calcium absorption by stimulating the parathormone receptor, and especially for dry cows. It is also a key for energy production, because energy is stored inside the cell as a complex Mg ATP. It is also important for muscle relaxation and helps animals handle stress better by regulating the nerve impulses. We all know also that magnesium has an antioxidant effect. It also supports the lipid mechanism by helping capture the fat precursor in the mammary gland. And finally, magnesium has an important effect on ruminal pH, which depends on its source. So this will be the main focus of my presentation today. So magnesium can be provided to animals in different forms, such as salts or oxides. And this graph here shows the relative biological value of various magnesium sources. So we can see that magnesium oxide has a higher magnesium content and solubility compared to other sources like magnesium chloride or dolomites. For example, for 100 grams of magnesium chloride, we have only 11 grams of magnesium solubilized. While, for example, for 100 grams of magnesium oxide, we have between 43 and 31 grams of magnesium solubilized. And this highlights the efficiency of magnesium oxide as a magnesium source in animal nutrition. However, magnesium oxides show variability due to several key factors. For example, the origin of the magnesium carbonate, whether from the mines, from the sea, or from synthetic process, it determines the raw material physical and chemical properties. So these characteristics will directly influence the purity and the quality of the final magnesium oxide. Also, a very important parameter, the calcination process. For example, parameters like the temperature, the duration of the process, and the type of the kiln used will affect the structure of the final magnesium oxide. For example, low temperatures will produce a more reactive magnesium oxide with higher solubility, which is ideal for agricultural application, like for animal nutrition. However, higher temperatures will yield a less reactive product, which is suitable more for industrial application. Other factors such hydration level, the particle size, and localization will impact the solubility, the specific surface area, and the reactivity of the final magnesium oxide. Here, a quick reminder about SARA. So it occurs in rations when we have high level of non-fiber carbohydrates, as explained Alex. Usually, it's affect between 20 to 25% of the TERICOs, and the risk rises when the ruminal pH drop below 5.8 for more than 3 hours per day. So as shown in the graph, so each time that the cow will eat, the pH will decrease. So our objective is to have a ruminal pH as stable as possible, and to spend less time in the risk, and to spend more time in the optimal range, ruminal range, which is between 6.2 and 6.5. So we all know the negative consequences of SARA, so I will go through the slide very quickly. So as we know, SARA causes the inflammation of the rumen wall, making it more permeable to toxin and increasing the risk of pathology like lameness and liver abscess. Also, it leads to a decrease in a dry matter intake, which causes a loss of performance with a drop in the milk fat. Also, it reduces rumination, and this will further also affect the digestion. So the images below here show the damage progression. So from normal mucozoa to papier atrophy in the picture B, and in the worst case scenario, an erosion with the scars. So it's important to manage ruminal pH. Ruminal pH is very important to prevent all these issues. So here we explain how magnesium oxide works in the rumen. So through 3 case steps. So the step 1, magnesium oxides react with water to form magnesium hydroxide crystals, and then these crystals will dissolve, which will release magnesium ions and hydroxide ions, and then these hydroxide ions will neutralize the acids present in the rumen, which will help to regulate the pH. So as we saw in the previous slides, a single source of magnesium oxide is not enough to predict its impact on rumen pH due to the many variability factors, as I was saying. So this is why a specific industrial process to select the best sources is essential. So this is how the specific magnesium oxide blend pHix-up was born. So in ruminant nutrition, we often use a classic buffer solution, as Alex was explaining, as sodium bicarbonate or marine algae like lithothamnium. But this product can help, but their effect is often short, while magnesium oxide have a higher neutralizing capacity. However, there is a big variability between sources. So pHix-up as a blend of magnesium oxide has 5 different crystalline structures. Each one will dissolve at a different speed, from very fast to very slow, which creates like a stair-step effect, as we can see here in the representation. Here I wanted to show you some results regarding our recent meta-analysis. So you will know that since the creation of pHix-up from 2018, we have conducted many trials to verify the effectiveness of pHix-up, with more than 40 trials. So for the meta-analysis, in total, 8 trials were carried out comparing 2 contemporary groups. So this trial involved in total 84 cows equipped with ruminal boluses over 3 months per trial, allowing for continuous ruminal pH measurement every 10 minutes. So the trials were conducted across various locations around the world, capturing a wide range of conditions. So the cows were divided into different treatments, comparing the effect of pHix-up with other treatments such as sodium carbonate, lithothamnium, and different combination with magnesium oxide and sodium bicarbonate. Also, in average, we compared 85 gram of pHix-up with the different buffer solution existing in the market. So the trials also varied in dietary composition, so specifically in starch and fiber content, which allows us to evaluate pHix-up performance under the different levels of acidosis risk. And this data provide us with a detailed view of pHix-up impact on ruminal pH control. So here the results of the mixed model. I did ANOVA, so which compared the pHix-up with other treatments. As I was saying, such as sodium bicarbonate, lithothamnium, and other buffers available in the market. So as you can see, with pHix-up, causes spent less time in acidogenic condition. For example, with pHix-up, causes spent 85 minutes less with a pH below 5.8, which is a high risk level for acidosis. Also, they spent more than 2 hours less with a pH below 6, which is another risk of acidosis. Additionally, so the cause spent 81 minutes more in an optimal pH range between 6.2 and 6.5. So also, as we can see in the Howley evolution of the rumen pH, we can see with the curves, with the green line with pHix-up, that the rumen pH tended to be higher all over the day in comparison with the other types of buffers. So we can say that pHix-up effectively stabilizes rumen pH in the dairy cows. And also that this meta-analysis showed that the time spent below pH 5.8 was considerably reduced. Also, regarding the milk yield results, we included in the meta-analysis data from 800 dairy cows with a total of more than 10,000 weekly milk yield records. So the results showed that cows supplemented with pHix-up produced 0.9 kilogram more milk per day on average compared to the control group. Also, while the fat and protein content remained stable. So the overall increase in milk yield suggests a positive impact on daily performance. So I don't know if you have questions regarding these slides. I think that is most important considering pKa for each salt and using the salt that starts work at 5.5 rumen pH.
The pK will give you 50% of the compound that is solubilized at that pH. It might be a bit too low, 5.5. I would probably go to 5.8 or 5.9. But yeah, it's a good approach.
Okay, thank you. So what is the good temperature of calcination to have soluble magnesium oxide? Alex, I don't know if you want to answer this question.
What is the good temperature? It's, I don't remember from the top of my head. It's very high. I think it's 4,000, but I don't remember. Calcination is important, but the source is very important, and the granulometry is also very important. But so it's not only one factor that you have to consider, but it's quite high. It's about 4,000 for sure.
For me, it's between 600 and 800. Yeah. Okay. I think that we don't have any more questions. So thank you everyone for attending this webinar, and for sure we will send you the replay of this webinar together with the Q&A document, so answering all your questions. Thank you so much, everyone.
Bye-bye,
and thank
guys.
you, Alex, for being with us today.
Thank you for listening. Bye-bye, guys.
Thank you. Bye.